Coming up, we will explore some exciting new UFO cases and ET encounters from one of the hardest working UFO researchers out there. From cases of people seeing strange craft and ETs to alien abduction cases and other strange encounters, including a few government UFO whistleblower cases. Get ready for an exciting discussion with prolific UFO and paranormal researcher Preston Dennett as he talks about some new cases from his latest book, Wondrous: 25 True UFO Encounters. So tonight, Preston Dennett is joining me once again on the show. Preston is a prolific UFO and paranormal researcher and author with well over 20 books to his name. He is joining me tonight to talk about some exciting new UFO cases he covers in his latest book, Wondrous: 25 True UFO Encounters. Preston, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah, doing pretty good. How are you?
Doing good, thanks. You just keep churning out these books. It's pretty amazing. And I don't know how you do it. I'm still working on my first book, and it's been over 2 years. So you're definitely hard at work at this. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show and talk with you. I'm really excited to get into some of these new cases. Now, kind of refresh my memory here. How long are we going back that you've been doing this? I know you talked about the 86 case that kind of caught your attention. So we're talking well over 30 years, right, that you've been doing this?
Yep, just about 35 now. So most of my life.
Wow.
Yeah, a real long time. It's been decades.
Yeah, it is a long time. I've been kind of covering the issue, not covering, but kind of delving into and reading about and kind of paying attention to the issue for well over 20 years. But wow, that's a long time. I want to get into these stories in the new book. If we can just go into it, maybe you can kind of give us a synopsis of some of these stories. I know we're not going to have time to cover all of these, but there's some real interesting ones that, you have the outline for there for the book. One talks about alien symbols appearing on the body of a woman. She's a therapist. And this leads her into a journey that is quite a shocking discovery. So let's start off with that one. What happens on that one?
Yeah, it's a very interesting case, actually. I don't think I've ever heard one quite like it. This was a lady I met at a UFO meeting in Burbank, California. And we got to chatting, and turned out she'd had some encounters. And yeah, very strange experience. She had suffered from some child abuse as a young kid. I don't think this is related to what happens next, but she was going to therapy and having a lot of success with it. That's why she became a therapist. She found it to be a very successful thing for her and wanted to help other people. So her therapist recommended that she goes to massage therapy because that can sometimes release hidden trauma. Just by going, having someone work on you. So she agreed, went to a massage therapist a number of times, and this is when something very strange started to happen to her. One day she's at home, looks down on her body and sees this strange mark on her body, and it wasn't like a scratch or anything. She does suffer from a condition called dermographia, which means that her skin welts up pretty easily. She can scratch herself and a red mark will appear. But she's looking down at this mark and it looks more like well, not a letter, but kind of a symbol, sort of like a hieroglyphic or something. But she couldn't make much sense of it. It was obviously of intelligent design, but she had no way to figure out how this could possibly have gotten there or even what it meant. And it kept happening. It happened several times. One day she's in the shower, cleaning herself, and looks down and there's a number of symbols on her leg. And this is when she started to something is going on here. And she started writing these things down. She got a little notebook and started copying these symbols as they appeared. And as she's actually copying these symbols, she would also feel compelled to draw little doodles, little drawings of sort of shapes she didn't quite know what they were, like little medical instruments perhaps, or just little doodles. And this happened several times till she had a pretty good notebook full of this stuff. And she's like, well, I'm going to research this. She goes to the bookstore first, checks out some books on symbology. No luck. Cannot match up any of these symbols to anything like Egyptian hieroglyphics or Sanskrit or Japanese or anything. Asks her friends, asks people she can, who she thinks might be knowledgeable on this, but no one can find what these symbols mean. And after trying over and over again, I mean, she actually even went to a Messianic temple, thinking, well, maybe they have, some knowledge of rare symbols. Nope, could not help her. And she finally just put the notebook away. The symbols had stopped appearing after a while. And she kind of forgot about it and thought, well, that's strange. That's something I guess I'll never understand. But then events kind of transpired. She was watching television at home with her boyfriend, and there was a TV miniseries on called Intruders. This is based on Bud Hopkins research. You may have heard, Bud Hopkins is an abduction researcher. Yeah, he's
absolutely
very well-known abduction researcher. And so this miniseries, Intruders, was based on his book Intruders. I watched it actually. It's really good. What I really like about this miniseries is it's accurate. So much stuff out there on UFOs, in terms of movies and dramas. It's not really accurate, And I'll point to Fire in the Sky, which was a great movie actually, but the onboard segment where Travis Walton's taken on board, that's not what happened to him. That was dramatized.
Right, and I found that out as well. I thought that was interesting because they did come out with a documentary on Amazon later, the Travis documentary, where I think he kind of set the record straight about his encounter and how it was not quite what had been portrayed in the Hollywood film.
Yeah,
but I'm sorry, go ahead back to what you were saying.
Yeah, it's such a shame because I had so many people asking me like, oh, is that what happened? I'm like, no. So Linda is her name. She's watching this documentary with her boyfriend. And there's a couple of segments where the people in the film are taken on board a craft. Ben Vereen, he's the actor who's portraying one of the abductees, is taken on board. And on board this craft, he sees symbols, sort of these weird alien symbols. And Linda sees the symbols in her mouth, her eyes go wide, she gets chills down her back, her jaw drops. And suddenly her husband blurts out, hey, honey, aren't those the symbols that were appearing on your body? And she's like, yeah, those are them. Those are them exactly. So she finally had her answer. These were alien symbols. And these were accurately portrayed in the movie, by the way. Bud Hopkins insisted on that. So these were true, I guess you'd call them ET symbols, ET letters. So that's when she started thinking, what could this possibly mean? Prior to this, she did have a couple of UFO sightings. Many years earlier, she was driving along the Pacific Coast Highway. This is in the early 80s in Southern California, overlooking the ocean. And she sees this, what looks like it wasn't a boat. It was this bright, bright light on the water. And it didn't look like a boat. It was just this giant, bright, white light. And she points it out to the guy who was driving. She says, what's that? And this darn thing, as soon as he looks at it, goes straight up real fast and disappears. So not a boat. A UFO. An unidentified, USO maybe. Unidentified.
Maybe coming out of water, yeah.
Right. So this got her thinking, about her past, like, why are these symbols, appearing on my body? And she started having memories of encounters as a little girl. These came in the form of dreams, actually, but they were very vivid, very unusual UFO dreams. And one of them, she was outside her house, at a wheat field next to their house, and she was standing next to these beings who I guess we would call human-looking beings or Nordics, perhaps. They weren't normal humans. They were, she didn't think they were. They were wearing jumpsuits, and she was inside this sort of beam of light, and they wanted to show her the landscape around her home as it looked in the past. And so it was very much like that movie H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, where she's watching the seasons go back into the past and the landscape's changing a little bit. She says it was really beautiful. She kept wanting to run out and touch stuff. And the person she was with says, no, no, don't stay there. It's dangerous. You got to stay here. Stay. Because, she's just a little kid. She's, impulsive
Sure.
and wants to run out there and look at it. So that was one dream. And another was even more interesting. She's outside her house with her mom, and there's this UFO over the house shining down a beam of light, and her mom's ordering her to go back inside. And she doesn't want to. This is in the dream. Like, no, I don't want to go back into the time beam again. And I'm like,
Wow.
right? Wow, that's exactly what I thought. Because I've never heard that. I've heard, beams of light lifting people up, levitating people. They can paralyze you. They can render solid objects permeable. They'll pull you through the wall, or invisible, transparent. They do all kinds of things. They can communicate with these beams of light. They heal people. They can burn people even. So they have a really good understanding, I think, of the electromagnetic spectrum. But as far as like a time beam, that was something I have not heard before. So yeah, this is a very unusual case, and it's kind of up in the air at this point about, is she a contactee or not? She thinks probably on some level she is. She's not quite ready to say she was taken on board or anything, but I think she probably was.
Now, Preston, did she get actual pictures of the markings on her, or just the drawings? Did she actually get any pictures?
Not that I saw. No, she may have, but I'm not going back to that. She did match these up to the television show Intruders. So she pulled out the notebook and looked at them again, and the other drawings she made suddenly made sense. She saw one that she kept drawing over and over again, and it looked like a plane, but she kept chopping off the front of the plane and the back, and then the wings, until it looked like just a sort of I guess a fuselage type thing, and she kind of made it into a dome shape. It had a little dome on top. It's a UFO. It was a flat out UFO is what she was trying to draw. And she's looking at she's looking at the other things, and she's like, wow, these look like medical instruments. That's what they look like. Little scalpels and needles or syringes or something. So that's another reason I think maybe she is an experiencer, because all of this stuff can be very easily buried in your subconscious.
Right. Yeah, that she was drawing those sorts of instruments. It certainly does make you wonder whether she actually, was taken aboard and, just, was recalling it, like you said, from the subconscious there. Wow.
Yeah, that's one way to recall memories, by the way, is just freehand doodling or through dreams, through the dream state.
Sure.
So maybe that's how that happened.
All right, so another interesting one here, or sounds quite interesting, is the mention of a silver-suited ETs that appear in the bedroom of an office worker. And this experience sounds like it was quite profound and life-changing. What's that story about?
Yeah, Connie Santos. What a neat lady. She was just a joy to interview. Really vivacious and funny, and so excited to talk to somebody about her experiences. She was a UFO skeptic. Well, not even really. I mean, she just had never thought about it until one day she wakes up in her apartment. It's like several stories up, three stories, I think it was, 4 stories. And this is in a crowded suburb in Washington. So she wakes up because there's this loud thrumming noise, a very loud, like thrumming, a humming noise coming from outside, and her bedroom is just filled with light. She first thought it was a helicopter or something. Maybe there's a drug bust, or she didn't live in a great neighborhood. She thought perhaps, the police were there, but it didn't sound like a helicopter. But her first thought was, well, this is waking up everyone in the building. Everyone has got to be hearing this. And that's when she realized she could not move. She could not move her body. Her eyes were open, she could see, and she's looking around, concerned, and boom, sees this short figure wearing almost like aluminum foil jumpsuit. And it scared the living daylights out of her. She was not expecting to see that. And first she saw just one, and then she realized, no, there was another one at the foot of the bed. I think she saw 3 total. And she's struggling and struggling. And at some point, she loses consciousness and wakes up the next morning thinking, was this a dream? What's going on? But she kind of knew instantly it wasn't, because for one thing, she was on top of her bedspread. The bed looked like it had been remade, like she just sat down in it. She was lying sideways. Her legs were propped up like she was going to the gynecologist to be examined. She felt a little disoriented, so she jumps up and can feel fluid running down her legs. That freaked her out. So she's like, gosh, this was a dream. She's telling herself it was a dream, even though she knows it wasn't. And she looks at the clock. She's a little late for work. She's not feeling great. So rushes off to go to work. And she has a hard time that day. She sits down at her computer and bam, she blows her computer up. It just goes offline. She calls over the IT guy who puts her back online after, a few minutes, restarts her computer. And she sits down to start doing her work, and bam, she locks up her computer again. So she calls the IT guy over and says, I don't know what's going on. So she goes to make copies and turns on starts working the copier and shuts that thing down. She's like, what is going on? Goes to the fax machine because she has, to fax something, and that breaks on her. So she is breaking all the machinery that she touches. When she told me that, I'm like, oh no, this is something I have heard before. I remember there was a guy I interviewed who was a welder at a factory who was operating very heavy, very expensive equipment. And he was a contactee, and he kept blowing it out day after day after day. And they finally wouldn't let him touch the equipment. His employers actually made him go to the doctor for a physical examination to see if they could determine why he was blowing out equipment. And I've heard this so many times that I've kind of figured it out. Whitley Strieber talks about this. A number of experiencers, they'll walk by radios or televisions and they'll fuzz up. Linda, the therapist, she had this problem too. Street lights would go out under her, as she walked under them. And she could sometimes, predict it. She's like, oh my God, I can feel it. It's going to go out. That one, she points to it. And the whole street goes out. All the power goes out in the entire street. So it's a person, it's a person's bioelectric field, I think, that has been enhanced or made powerful, or it's like their aura, so to speak. I think that's what's going on here. Because this is super common. People will blow out light bulbs. Many contactees tell me, oh, I can't tell you. I've got a huge light bulb budget because they just blow up light bulb after light bulb after light bulb.
And I've heard of this phenomena with people not necessarily associated with abductions, but with people doing this for some unknown reason.
That's a known phenomenon. There's people who are kind of like electric. They can actually hold a light bulb and it will light up. There's a guy who can do that. He just meditates and is able to make a light bulb actually illuminate. So she,
Unreal.
yeah, so she's having all these physiological reactions. She, was actually really ill that day, had diarrhea, and her taste buds were off. Her sense of taste was kind of, very much dampened, I guess. And her mouth felt almost numb. She had like a chemical taste in her mouth that persisted for a week. And she had no idea how to interpret this. She's like, "Oh my gosh, was this, ghost? It doesn't feel like a ghost. Could it be a demon? Oh my God." She started doing research and like, "Well, it doesn't sound like a ghost or a spirit or anything like that." And just kept searching on the internet. And she's like, finally decided she was going to check out the UFO phenomena. She was kind of nervous to do that. Might open up a can of worms. And it did, because it absolutely matched what she was experiencing. As she's reading people's accounts, she suddenly started looking at experiences in her past in a different way. She had suffered from sort of night terrors for years, as a kid especially. Dreams where she's being chased. There would be many times she'd wake up in her bed and her head was at the foot of the bed. And she's like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, her parents are like, "Well, maybe you're just a restless sleeper." She's like, "I can't be that restless." I mean,
Yeah, turning 180 degrees. Wow.
can you
Yeah,
imagine? And
that would be very restless.
yeah,
So Preston, how long did she talk about how long the condition continued, where she was actually affecting, having a effect on electronics and that sort of thing?
it was never as profound as it was that day, the day after.
Hmm.
But occasionally after that, yeah, yeah. And another thing she remembered is hearing weird, loud buzzing noises come over her home as a kid. Often when she would go out visiting friends, which was a much more rural area, that's when it would happen. And she'd ask her friend, did you hear anything last night? Something was really loud. It was buzzing over the whole house. And her friend, nope, never heard anything. So yeah,
Wow.
she was not a super religious person, but somewhat at that point. And started looking for other answers because this just, it expanded her worldview. She needed to figure out what was going on and became really spiritual actually as a result of this encounter.
Interesting. Now, there's another one here that talks about a young couple uh, that had their first child and that believed that ETs had taken their child. Wow, that's got to be
Yeah,
an interesting one.
yeah. I was really, I mean, my heart went out to this couple. They were a young couple. She actually had just emigrated from Europe. Didn't know. I mean, she knew English well enough. I thought she did, but she felt like she wasn't fluent. But speaking with her, she was plenty. I mean, absolutely could speak English just fine. I thought. But at any rate, they had just moved to a small town in Canada and were having a lot of red tape issues with, her citizenship, health insurance, finding a new job, starting a new business, fixing up the house. They had a lot going on, and they became pregnant. They're like, "Oh, this was kind of unplanned," but they were, happy enough about it. It was pretty thrilling. They're excited, and the pregnancy went along very smoothly. They went to the doctor and confirmed it, and got a midwife. They wanted to do a natural childbirth. Had regular doctor visits. They did an ultrasound, the whole deal. Started hearing the baby's heartbeat. At about 4 months, she could start feeling it wiggling around and moving and kicking her stomach and sitting on her bladder and all the things that a mother feels, a pregnant woman.
Sure.
And yeah, it just was proceeding beautifully. Gaining weight. She sent me the pictures of the medical tests showing that she was pregnant, and her stomach, very large. So she absolutely, verified it with me. And one day, I think it was like they were about 6.5, 7 months pregnant. They're going to go to a party near their house with friends. They're just driving them alone in a car, and they're on their way to their friend's house when they get disoriented. They're like, where are we? What's going on? And suddenly, the next thing they know, they're pulling up to their destination. And they get a real shock. They look at the clock, and they're like early, unexplainably early. It should be impossible. They had somehow been, I don't want to call it missing time because they actually got there much earlier, but they had a definite confusion with time, which is a huge red flag for me as a UFO researcher. But at the time, they didn't know how to interpret it. They weren't really, they hadn't read any UFO books. But I started asking questions, and sure enough, they both do have a history of encounters. He, before they got married, had a UFO sighting, as had his father, and she recalls a number of times when she saw what she describes as light beings, kind of glowing figures coming into her bedroom. So that was another red flag for me, like, these guys are in contact with ETs. Her father, I think, was also a very well-known psychical investigator in Europe. So that could be significant. At any rate, one night, they're 7.5 months pregnant now. So they're, right there, very close to full term, when they experienced a very odd electrical storm right over their house. And when I say odd, it was super intense. There was lightning just striking down real close to them. He jumps up to close the window because they were getting a little frightened, and he saw a bolt of electricity or lightning. It looked a little strange though because it was going sideways across his yard. Freaked him out. He slammed the window closed and hopped back in bed, and they were kind of clinging to each other like, oh my God, I hope we're going to be okay. And here's when another strange thing happened. They fell asleep. Bam, instantly, which they both thought was really odd because they were pretty alarmed. They weren't like in, super sleepy at this point. They were kind of hyped up and their adrenaline was pumping because this was a big, big storm. And they wake up the next morning feeling pretty groggy. She says, I almost feel like I had surgery or something. I'm feeling really disoriented. And you know what, honey? I don't feel pregnant. He's like, what are you talking about? She said, I don't feel pregnant. He says, don't be ridiculous. She said, look, my stomach, it's not as big. And he had to admit that, yeah, she was right. It still looked like she was pregnant. Their baby at that point was in a breech position, which had been verified by the midwife. So she was doing exercises to sort of encourage the fetus to turn around to the correct position for a natural childbirth. So they thought maybe that's it. They were due to go to their doctor in 3 days. They moved up the appointment because they were concerned, and go to the doctor, and he cannot find a heartbeat. They do all these tests. She's not pregnant. He's like, I'm really sorry, you're not pregnant. And she's like, well, what do you mean? She says, did you have an abortion? Did you pass any tissue? He says, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And she says, well, it must have been a mistake. It must have been a misdiagnosis. There's going to be disciplinary action taken. We don't know how to explain this. It must have been a misdiagnosis. Now that made them really angry because they knew, hands down, that was not possible. Blood tests confirmed it. They heard the baby's heartbeat on numerous occasions, could feel the baby kicking. They had made a nursery, painted the room, they bought a crib, the whole deal. They knew they were pregnant, and now they weren't. The doctors were baffled. They were very interested in her case. Before she was having all kinds of trouble, getting doctor's appointments. Not anymore. They're like, if you get pregnant again, please come see us right away. You'll be our star patient. Yeah.
Now, Preston, have you ever heard of anything like this happening before in all your research?
Yeah, I sure have. This is actually a somewhat consistent feature. There are other cases in the same book, wondrous. In fact, every book that I've written on which people, have onboard experiences or extensive encounters has a couple of cases like this. This is not uncommon. This is the hybrid baby phenomena. People will suddenly have a missing pregnancy. And generally speaking, it's, they'll be pregnant for maybe 2-3 months, max 4 in my own files. And then they suddenly lose the baby. So that it does occur, but I have never had a case, and I have never heard of one, actually, in all the literature, which was carried to 7.5 months before suddenly being taken. So that's very unusual.
Now, did the lady ever recall having any experiences, strange experiences up to or prior to this tragic event that occurred?
No,
Any?
no, not really. I mean, psychic events. That's another thing that does turn up in a number of these cases. People have, clairvoyance and precognition and things like this. The only thing she can recall is seeing light beings come into her room. That's it. Yeah, it was. Here's another weird aspect. They were pretty upset at first. I mean, he was weeping. She cried too, but she told me, she says, "You know what? I'm actually kind of okay with it." I'm like, really? And she said, "Yeah. I just know, I can feel it, that my baby is alive and being well cared for, and I think they have my child." She doesn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but she feels like this child of hers is okay, and she's okay with this experience. The husband was more upset than she was. They had to tell both their parents, both their sets of their parents were still living, and were super excited about having grandkids. It was their first child. And they told him flat out, "We think aliens took our baby." And yeah, some of the parents were religious, like, "What? What?"
Yeah, and I don't. That's a tough one to try and explain.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking to someone who perhaps is not accepting of the possibility of that. I can imagine that would be a hard conversation to have. Another story in here is of a young child that's greeted by a UFO with a telepathic message that was only meant for her.
Yes, Debbie, really neat lady. She contacted me because she had gone to a conference in Laughlin where all these people were describing very negative experiences. She's like, "That's not what happened to me. I actually had a really good experience." And she was 5 years old one evening when she woke up and saw a classic silver flying saucer outside her bedroom window, not far away. It was treetop level, very low. And she knew instantly what it was, even at that age. She felt like this was from outer space. This was a craft from outer space. And she's looking at it and just totally amazed. And they came there to say hello, basically. And we are friends with you, and we will see you again. It was kind of just a short little message, and she doesn't really. I mean, she spoke just seized by this feeling of intense longing, actually, and she started crying, and she says, "Please take me with you. I don't belong here. I don't belong here. Please take me with you. This isn't my home. I want to go with you." And at this point, the craft did respond. She can't quite remember how. Maybe it dipped down a little bit, perhaps. Maybe it flashed its lights or darted around. She can't quite remember, but it did respond. And then it took off. And she didn't tell anyone. She kind of knew people wouldn't believe her. And it was also her sort of special secret. And she didn't want anyone to, sully it with, skepticism or ridicule. So she kept it secret and thought it was a one-off. Did not really expect to see them again until she did. She was walking. This is in a different state, actually. They had moved. And this was in Portland, Oregon, actually. And she's walking home late one evening. It was around 11 p.m., December, and 1974. She's 17 years old and is just walking home, and suddenly this craft drops down out of the sky, and she recognizes it. It's the same one. And she said she just got this impulse to look up, and she did. And this thing was about 50 feet overhead. Two banks of light on the underside of the ship, reddish-orange lights, yellowish-green lights. And it was quite large. And she felt no fear. She sort of felt like this was just for her to see, because the street was completely deserted. And again, she got that same intense feeling of longing and wanting to go with them. And she was super excited, and she spoke out to them. She says, "Hi, my name's Debbie. I pretty much know what you are. I don't know who you are, but I know what you are. I wish you peace and joy, and I mean you no harm." And this is when she got a very clear telepathic message instantly back, very, clear in English words. And the words were, "Sister, we know of you. We have been watching you. We wish you peace and joy. We mean you no harm, and we will see you again." When I spoke with her, that was, some years later. She hadn't had another visit after that. But she did have an interesting reaction to this. She said following that encounter, she started having all kinds of psychic events. She could see auras. She was having precognition. She had the ability to heal. And it was so strong, she actually, it transformed her life. And today, that's what she does for a living. She does Reiki, aura readings, hands-on healing, psychic consultations, and makes a decent living doing this. It is her mission to help people, to waken them up spiritually. And that's a pattern I see over and over and over again with who's being contacted and why. It's people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity, or people who have this in their family already. It kind of follows their family.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think in another interview I did with you, you talked about that as well. If there were some kind of patterns or some of the people being taken, if there was some sort of common backgrounds. And I think you talked about that before, that there seems to be a lot of people that are taken that have been in social work or that have been doing kind of good things. So that's quite interesting to see that there are some patterns here amongst the people that are experiencing these sorts of things. The other story I wanted to get into here, which I thought sounded kind of interesting. This is about a group of teenagers who came upon a flying saucer, witnessed humanoid type ETs, it sounds like. We're not very happy to see them. What was kind of the end result of this encounter?
Yeah, this is the one I'm thinking of. This is one that took place in Canada. I think that's the one you're mentioning here.
Yeah, just talked about a group of teenagers that came upon a saucer with that had the humanoid type beings.
Yeah, that's got to be the one I'm thinking of because I'm looking at all the chapters. So, yeah, this involves this gentleman who wanted to remain anonymous. He was very clear about that. And at any rate, he was very interested in UFOs from a young age. Well, he had had an experience as a kid where something came into his bedroom and he was paralyzed. He didn't know what it was. It kind of freaked him out. And it was just one time, so he thought maybe it was sleep paralysis. But as a young man, he became very interested in spirituality and learning about the pyramids, and he found out about CE5 work and that you can call down a UFO using meditation and lights. And so that's what he started experimenting with his girlfriend, and it worked. They actually were able to call down UFOs on 3 or 4 occasions, and one came quite close. So that was really exciting. And then as a young man, he was vacationing with his friends at Wasaga Beach. This is in Ontario, Canada. And he's like, let's take a walk. Let's take a walk on the beach. And his friends are like, no, I don't want to. I don't want to. He's like, no, come on. It's a warm July night. Let's do it. Let's do it. And they said, fine. So we'll go. And so they're walking down the beach, and suddenly his friends stop moving. And he's like, why did you stop? And what's wrong? Hello? And they didn't answer him. And they were like stuck in mid-step. And he's like, why aren't you moving? And they still didn't answer. And he started to, freak out because he starts looking around and the leaves on the trees aren't moving. Nothing is moving. The waves aren't moving. The water is like frozen. And there's a weird electricity in the air and just that eerie, oppressive silence. And that's when he notices these figures down by the beach. And he's looking at them because they don't look normal. They're very, very tall. And they don't look like they're dressed normal. They're quite, a couple of 100 yards away, so can't see them too well. But then next thing he knows, he's disoriented for a second and finds himself suddenly standing right in front of him, just 3 feet away. There's 3 of these guys. One's kind of in front, and 2 are standing in a row behind the closest one. And he's a tall guy. He's 6 feet tall, and he has to look up to see this guy. And he says, I think this guy was 9, no, I'm going to say 10 feet tall. I'm like, 10? He's like, well, yeah. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, and this guy was almost twice my height. Huge. Wearing these kind of dark, shiny, black clothes. He wasn't really paying too much attention to what they were wearing because he was really mesmerized by their faces, and particularly this guy's eyes, which were huge. This is absolutely enormous. Much bigger than a normal person. The whole face was gigantic. The eyes were kind of bright, flecked with gold and green sort of flecks, he said. And very hypnotic, kind of bluish gold lined irises is what he said. And the eyes were just hypnotizing. And he could feel them just radiating sort of power at him. And he could see their teeth, which were jagged and dirty. Their skin looked thick and wrinkly, and he had the impression these guys were old. I mean, like old, over 100, 200 or so. And he wanted to talk to them. He was going to go up to them and say, can you help me? Why are you here? And the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, you shouldn't be here. That's what he said. And you can't be here. And this being stares down at him in a thick, loud, gravelly voice. He imitated it for me. And it was just like the guy was talking with gravel in his throat. He said, "We can come and go wherever we want. Nothing can stop us." And that freaked him out. That was a very kind of somewhat threatening message, I guess. I mean, he kind of took it that way. It scared him. And it was enough for him to just turn around and run. And he didn't look back. He didn't see a UFO on this occasion. So that's kind of unusual. But runs up to his friends who are now actually walking back and moving just fine. And they don't seem to remember anything unusual. And here's where it gets weird. He runs up to them and he starts to forget what happened. And by the time he meets up with them, he's like, "Gosh, something just happened. What was it? What was it?" And it's slipping from his mind. And by the time he got home, it was just completely gone. I mean, he didn't even remember anything. What did happen is felt really tired, just dead tired, and literally walks in and plops on the couch and falls fast asleep. Wakes up the next morning, still no memory. No memory for days and days. 2 weeks later, though, they go back to the same cabin, and suddenly he remembers, just floods back into his mind. And he's with the same friends, and he says, "Hey, guys, remember when we walked on the beach a couple weeks ago?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And he says, "Did anything happen?" They're like, "No, no." He says, "Nothing happened?" And a couple of them were like, "Well, yeah, I mean, we saw you walk up to some people on the beach. Who were they?" And he's like, "Oh, you remember that?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they didn't think there was anything unusual. And he didn't want to say, "Oh, they were aliens."
Sure.
Because he hadn't come out to his friends. He had not talked about UFOs with him and his interest and his prior experiences. So he just kept it all secret and didn't tell them. But overall, while it was a traumatic experience, he doesn't feel like it was negative. He doesn't feel like he was abducted or anything. I'm kind of on the fence about it because he did have that confusion with time. And whenever that happens, that almost always means someone was taken on board. I don't know. I don't know.
Now, Preston, amongst these stories here, I mean, just kind of a ballpark or kind of a guesstimate, percentage-wise, how many would you say of the subjects felt threatened, harmed in some sort of way, or took it came away with it with a negative kind of view or negative experience?
That's a good question. I'm going to say out of the 25, 2.
Wow.
Which is not a lot. I mean, there
Right.
was one guy who was healed. Many of them felt spiritually transformed. Many of them felt it was outright friendly. Some felt like they were given warnings. But 2 did have what they would describe as negative experiences. One lady, it was very frightening in the beginning, but became very positive. So it's a kind of a tricky question to answer. But yeah, overall, I'm encouraged by what actually happens when someone's taken on board or meets ETs, because it can be very scary in the beginning. I mean, no doubt, when you're pulled out of your bedroom or suddenly you see one of these things, it can be very scary. But
Sure.
often people are healed, or like I said, they're spiritually transformed, or they're given messages about nuclear proliferation or pollution or warlike ways or this sort of thing. So overall, I'm pretty encouraged because what I don't see is what I would call outright sadism or torture or ETs, getting their jollies by hurting people. I don't think that's their agenda at all. I really don't. I don't see no evidence of that.
I mean, that would be less than really 10% of the cases you're looking at here where people came away with a negative experience. So, yeah, I'd agree that seems kind of encouraging, even though, they may be frightened by the experience. And who wouldn't be frightened if you're seeing something that you're not really knowing what you're experiencing or seeing. I think anybody probably is going to be initially frightened about that.
Right. Oh, and
The
now,
one,
now, actually, I remember what case you were talking about. It wasn't the one I was mentioning, where the kids came upon a saucer that freaked them out. That was another case. I know that was up in San Dimas, California, where a group of teenagers were going up to this little hidey spot on a mountain near their home, off the golf course. Really, they drove up there and they would just hang out. And this was a tough dirt road to go up, and they came upon this field where they'd always hang out, and there was something in the field. It was huge. It couldn't have been a helicopter. It was far too massive. Couldn't have been a truck or anything. There's no way a truck could get up that road. So they had no theory as to what this thing could be, but it covered almost the entire field on one end. Bright, bright, bright lights. They could see human-like figures walking around, silhouettes, and this creeping closer and closer to figure out what this could be when suddenly one of these figures starts walking towards them. And as it starts walking towards them, they can see it's a lot bigger than they thought. Now, this is a big, big guy. And they're like, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you here?" And he didn't answer, would not answer, just kept marching towards them at a very measured pace, very deliberate. And that's what freaked him out. The way he was kind of walking almost threateningly towards them and would not answer any questions. So they piled into their car and took off and went straight to the police, actually. Just told him what happened. Says, please investigate, please investigate. So this was at night. The police officer, to his credit, took them seriously. This was a group of, 4 or 5 teenagers. And went up to investigate and said he found nothing. They called the police station later and he's like, no, didn't see anything up there. They went up there the next day. No evidence whatsoever of anything being in that field, which again doesn't make sense. If it was a helicopter, it was a truck, they would have seen, depressions in the grass. It was, fairly thickly grassed field. Nothing.
sure.
So this thing was probably like, I don't know, floating above a couple feet. I don't know, they couldn't say for sure. But they said it wasn't a helicopter. I can tell you for sure that it wasn't that. So, yeah, that's that case that you were referencing.
Interesting. Now, I wanted to ask you, because you get a lot of these cases, that you've researched over the years, a lot of people that talk to you. So what's kind of the filter that you use to decide whether or not this is something you find compelling enough to write about?
Well, if it's credible, if I feel like these people are sincere, I've got some way of verifying their story, that's certainly a prerequisite. Sometimes I will do themed type of books. Like one of my books was Onboard UFO Encounters. And boy, I had some good stories, but I couldn't include them because the people were not taken on board. And yeah, another one, it was Inside UFOs, sort of the same thing. I really wanted to talk about people who had actual humanoid encounters that were taken on board. And so I was starting to build a sort of library or a file, I guess, of cases I really wanted to present, but just could not fit them into a book. And that's kind of why I wanted to put this book together, because it covers a wide variety. It's not just people who've been taken on board. There's some really interesting landing cases, people who had face-to-face encounters. I got some government whistleblower accounts. I wanted to include those for a long time. I had just gotten another one recently. I'm like, ooh, I've got to find a way to get these stories out there. So that was sort of why I wanted to put this book together. But really the ultimate prerequisite is that, because I've got cases that aren't really what I would call educational. They're very much run-of-the-mill, don't really have anything to contribute new to our understanding of the phenomena. So that is what I really like when I've got a case that has, say, unique elements or makes a really good point, like that case involving the couple who had a baby that was taken. That has some very interesting elements to it that I've never seen before. Or the lady with the symbols on her leg. These are unique cases that sort of speak towards the ET agenda. So that's what I'm looking for, something that will sort of add to our understanding of this phenomena.
Yeah, and I want to get into the whistleblower cases, a few of them here. One is, these are usually pretty interesting. One is about a military officer invited to the inner sanctum of the government's UFO cover-up and learned some new secrets that really kind of shake him to his core. What's that story really about?
Yeah, this was a guy who had been, you know, we'd been corresponding for a while. And once he kind of grew to trust me, he started, revealing more. And I was able to verify his employment. He was a high-level military officer on the USS Kidd, a Navy ship. He had a top secret clearance and retired from the Navy after some years, and was going to college on a sort of military scholarship, and was approached by this gentleman because he had been, doing research. He's always been interested in UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts and unexplained. That was sort of his hobby. And this was well before the or internet had come along. And then when the internet came along, he started really diving into it and connecting with some people within government. And he had the knowledge and the lingo to sort of correspond with people, and they could see that he was, one of them. He was one of the military guys, and he already had sort of kind of an inside pathway to some of these other guys who also had top secret clearances. And they were talking about UFOs, and it was getting more and more interesting. And one of these guys asks him if he would be interested in learning more, and being about what's really going on. He said, "Yeah, of course, yeah." And he's at the college in Northern California where he's studying, and someone approaches him. He says, "Hey, how do you do?" And seems to know all about him. He doesn't know this guy from Adam. And says, "Oh, yeah, I was sent by your friend, and I understand you're interested in perhaps coming involved in what's going on with the UFO situation." And use kind of very couched, vague terms, but implied very clearly that it involved UFOs. And he's like, "Yeah, I am interested." And was sometime later he approached him again and said, "Oh," and made it very clear this time that we are actually part of this group that recovers crashed UFOs. And if you would like to be a part of it, we would love to have you join us. But you cannot have a family. You have to be completely quiet about this. You will not be able to talk to anyone about this. And he had recently developed a close relationship with a woman and did not want to give that up. So he said, "No, thank you, but no thank you." But he decided he was going to sort of stay connected to these guys, and he started to really learn some interesting stuff, and found out that apparently a number of UFOs had been recovered during the Vietnam War. That Agent Orange wasn't used to sort of for the enemy, but was in fact used as a defoliant to sort of make it easier to recover these crashed UFOs in the jungle. They would, surround the perimeter and move inward, and anything that was within the perimeter was destroyed until they came upon the craft and recovered it. Two were recovered in that fashion in Vietnam. That's what he learned from these insiders. And he learned also all about Area 51, and what he was told flat out from a guy who worked there that this goes many, many stories underground. This is something that has been confirmed by other whistleblowers, certainly. He confirmed a lot of what Bob Lazar said, a lot of what other whistleblowers have said, that there is reverse engineering, and that there are ETs working, greys, working along with humans, and at the very bottom levels of Area 51, which is still active, despite some people's protestations to the contrary, it is still active. You cannot go there. You will be shot. They will
Right.
use they will use deadly force. But at any
Absolutely.
rate, he says that the very lowest levels are not even accessible to most humans. You have to get permission. You have to be escorted by one of these ETs. He talked about J-Rod, who's a very famous gray, who's been sort of publicly outed by a number of other whistleblowers. And at one point, he actually was talking to one of these military guys who he thought was a military guy, but he wasn't. He suddenly changed into a gray. So he had this face-to-face encounter with a gray that was masquerading as a human being. So it kind of that freaked him out, and he saw how badly some of these guys who were there were suffering because one guy he talked to left. He wanted out, didn't want to do it anymore. And they said, okay, you can go out, but there's a price. And the price was steep, steep. It was very high. They wiped his memory completely clean. And he didn't even remember anything until he had a car accident and started flooding back. He remembered all this stuff and said that there was many, many thousands of people. I mean, we're talking 20, 30, 40,000 people living in this sort of underground city in Area 51. So it's crazy. I know a lot of the stuff is very hard to verify. It's right on the fringe of the fringe. But if you look at the other whistleblower accounts, it all starts to match up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Another one is about a man was working at Maelstrom Air Force Base, and was embroiled in what you say here is one of the most famous encounters in UFO history. What encounter are we talking about there?
Yeah, 1967. Robert Salas has written a book about this. He was the first whistleblower to come out and say that in 1967 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where we house nuclear-tipped missiles, multiple UFOs came down and shut down the missiles. And not just one, all of them. The entire base went down. It was on lockdown. This caused concern at very high levels because the missiles were inoperable for almost a day. And he's not the only one saying this. There are now a number of whistleblowers who have confirmed his story. And I was contacted by Mel Hansen is his name. He's a very elderly guy. I talked to him about 5 years ago. And he says, I want to do my part for disclosure because he heard about this sighting on TV. And actually his daughter heard it. She's like, Dad, this is what you were telling me. He's like, oh my God, I guess we can talk now. Because he was pretty much told not to talk. I mean, not pretty much. He was told not to talk about this. So I figured,
Sure.
well, if they're talking about it, I'm going to talk about it. And I actually called up a number of radio stations, a couple of researchers, and just couldn't get through. And found me. And I'm like, wow, yeah, of course. Let's tell your story. So he is a new additional witness to the Malmstrom incident. He was out there at one of these missiles when he looks up and sees one of these craft. Robert Salas was underground. He was operating, near the radar and all of that stuff. He didn't actually see it. Guards saw it. Other people saw the missiles go down, but this guy, Mel, saw the UFO, and he said it was big. It was dark. It blocked out the stars. It came right over the missile and boom, shut it down. And now these have backup powers. So as soon as it shuts down, the diesel generator goes on and the thing still has power. That shuts down momentarily, just moments later, and there's a third backup, a battery power backup, and that goes down. So now the missile is just dead silent. And he said this thing was so eerie. Uh, didn't see any little green man, nothing like that. But some of the people, that he was with were freaking out. Uh, they radioed, the supervisors, and they're like, just stay there, stay in your Jeep, don't do anything. He got out and looked at it. He couldn't help himself. He had to just take a closer look. And finally, uh, the other people come. This thing moves away, and they're told to go away. And the next day, he's told you can come back and gather your tools. He was kind of surprised about that. And he goes back, and this place is just crawling with people investigating this incident. And he was pulled into his supervisor's office and told in no uncertain terms, "You are not to talk about this." And he didn't, and neither did his friends, who, he was good buddies with some of his coworkers. Unfortunately, they're now all deceased. But he really wanted to do his part to speed up disclosure. This is what most of the whistleblowers I've talked to have said, that they feel it's the public's right to know what's going on.
Now, I've heard that there's been former Soviet whistleblowers as well that talked about this happening in the Soviet Union as well. So it seems that these perhaps ETs were trying to send a message on both ends, that we're watching, and we can disable you at any time. I don't know if you've heard anything about the other end of that happening on the Soviet side. Have you heard anything about that?
Yep, I sure have. I think this is worldwide. It's certainly across the United States. The Malmstrom incident isn't unique in the US. It's not unique in the world. This has happened. Anything nuclear, the ETs are there. I talked to another guy who was an officer on the USS Long Beach, a guided missile cruiser, and UFOs showed up there. I talked to another guy on the USS Clamagore. He had a USO. The Clamagore is a submarine, and he was on watch with another officer and the commander and the second in command. This is on the East Coast. They're traveling on the surface of the water when this USO, an unidentified submersible object, shows up and paces the submarine for 15 minutes. Well, the Clamagore is carrying nuclear-tipped torpedoes. That was not known at the time. This is 1971. So they are all about nuclear power and watching very closely and sending a message. And I think, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what this was. I think from a military perspective, I can see why they're freaking out and thinking, this could be a hostile act. I don't think that's it at all. I think it was a very simple and clear message, like, you are messing around with nuclear power. What are you doing? This is wrong. You're going to hurt yourself. And this is exactly what contactees are being told over and over and over and over again. It's one of their number one messages.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the moment, you had the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, where you couldn't weaponize space. But now with the Chinese and, a lot of their technology and perhaps what we're doing too, I think there's a lot of concern that eventually nukes may get parked in space. And then how are they going to react at that point?
Yeah, I think they will intervene. Honestly, I do. I mean, they didn't for, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't for Chernobyl. They did not stop Fukushima. And I think there's a reason for that. Because if they just come in and solve all our problems, well, we're not going to learn. This is the school of hard knocks. Just like a parent, has to allow their children to, bump their head and fall down and learn that way, spread your wings and fly. They're not going to step in unless, it's going to be a extinction type event, an existential crisis. Then I think they probably would step in. And it's my understanding, I've talked to some contactees about this, and they were told, oh yeah, we have stepped in on a number of occasions when you guys would have fried yourself. Because apparently when we test nuclear bombs, it is ripping a hole in space-time. It is destroying areas in other dimensions we're not aware of. And that's just, and our own planet. I mean, when we explode something, it doesn't go away. This radiation lingers for, I don't want to say forever, but it may as well be forever. I mean, it's that
Right.
long.
Well, Preston, we're getting short on time. Another great conversation, some great cases here. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen so that we can pull up a copy of the book. And where can people find the book, the new book?
Yeah, it's actually available at online retailers like Amazon or Barnes & Noble or what have you. You can also go to my website, which you can find it there. My website is actually, if you just use a search engine and type in my name, you should be able to find it pretty easily. It's prestondennett.weebly.com, and I've got excerpts there. You can also contact me through my website if you're interested in sharing a story, or you have a question or a comment or something. Always love hearing from people. But yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This is, I think, a really important subject. We're having really significant steps towards disclosure. I don't really expect our government to be totally truthful or transparent or forthcoming. I really don't. But it's very encouraging to see that they're making some steps at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that UAP task force's report is due here shortly, just really in a couple of weeks. So, I think a lot of people are watching for that. Are we going to have a report come out that's just going to be a dumbed down report that says, yeah, we have some more unknown cases. We've had some more cases of contacts with unknowns, and we're still researching and looking into it, and we don't know what they are. I mean, are you expecting something like that? That's kind of what I guess I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about what the outcome's going to be here, but what are you kind of expecting to come out as a result of this?
Not much. I think they're going to be very disingenuous. They have a very, very long history of lying, disinforming, ridiculing witnesses, using our tax dollars to make witnesses look ridiculous, like they're on drugs, hoaxing, hallucinating, misperceiving. That's been their go-to since this began. So now they're going to suddenly come clean. I'm a little jaded. I am encouraged to see that there's some movement, but I think they've got so much pressure on all sides that they have no choice. They have to make steps towards disclosure, or they will lose complete control of the subject. They will lose all credibility. They almost already have. So I think their hand is being forced, and I don't think they're gonna. I mean, at best, we're probably going to get some more blurry pictures, maybe some films. Maybe they'll show us a piece of metal because the Pentagon, or sort of quasi-Pentagon officials, said that we do have material from otherworldly vehicles. Direct quote. That's huge. But it's disingenuous because, yeah, we have material from otherworldly vehicles. We have the otherworldly vehicles. We have the Roswell crash, the Aztec crash, the Kecksburg, the Aurora crash in Arizona. I mean, there's hundreds of these things. We have the alien bodies. Stop lying to us. We know you have them. It's not just one or two whistleblowers. There's hundreds upon hundreds who have said it, and they're very high level within government and the military industrial complex. They've got unimpeachable resumes. So I'm not really expecting our government. I think what they're going to do is like, yeah, we've got unknowns. We think they might be Russian or Chinese. We're not sure. They know it's not a foreign government. And they may even say otherworldly, but I think they're going to backpedal when it comes to saying it's actually extraterrestrial, when they know full well and have known for over 70 years. that this is extraterrestrial. They know it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I don't think there's going to be any sort of definitive statement about that these are otherworldly. We had the Tic Tac and the Go Fast, the Gimbo videos. They've all said they're unidentified, but we're still looking into it. That's kind of what I'm expecting as well. Well, Preston, once again, it's been quite a pleasure talking with you. It's always fun. It's always interesting conversation. Churning out books like it's amazing to me how often you're doing putting the books out and doing all this work. Once again, thanks again for all the work you're doing, and I'm sure we'll talk again down the road.
Hey, I hope so. Yeah, thanks. It's awesome.
All right. Thank you. All right. Have a great night, Preston.